Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of No Bull with Nobu, the All-American Shaman. Nobu, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me, brother.
Thank you for being here as always. So today you wanted to talk about, and I've got a lot of questions on this, so I'm excited for it too, talk about soul retrievals and animal totems. So maybe we could start off, in your words, what is a soul retrieval? I'm imagining that's a shamanic practice.
When a shaman, such as myself, conducts a soul retrieval, they are restoring lost parts of someone, getting their soul, to them. And there's many ways that someone's soul can become fragmented. It could be through a traumatic experience. It could be through addiction. It could just be a part of their experience of where they gave too much of their power away to someone else. Again, this is very common with romantic experiences and then also family members, where people outsource their sovereignty to someone else. And then I, bring it back to them. And then this often takes the form of different animal spirits in my practice.
Maybe I could just ask a clarifying question. So a soul, I think of that as maybe like one unit. So when parts of souls, you said fragmented or lost parts, do you still have, would that person still have like a unit within themselves, but then other distinct units out there? Or is it kind of like the energetic space of that one is like continuous and it's just further away from the person? Or kind of how do we imagine that?
If everyone has 100% of their soul, then they are whole. They are holy. It's also in the word whole. There's the E at the end of the HOLE. But anyways, I digress. I can have fun with words all day.
Yeah.
But when they lose it, they're at 99%, they're at 95%, they're at 90%. And then this can also attribute to someone's lack of depth or breadth in their experience of life. Because again, if you are not whole, then you are lacking. And so there's going to be things lacking in your experience. And by restoring those parts, people will have a much drastic perception and experience of reality.
Would someone be able to tell if they had lost certain parts of them? Like, what are some of the signs and symptoms, perhaps, if they've lost, say, 50% or 75% or something like that?
The biggest things I would say is it's going to manifest in what we call depression or apathy or addiction, where people are no longer following their purpose or driven towards an objective in life, whether that be, again, providing for their children, a career, their art, etc. But when people fall into hedonism or apathy, it's indicative that they've given something away or they lost something. And people will say in their speech too, like, I lost my edge, I lost my drive, I lost my will,
Lost myself. Yeah, I think I've said that to you at least a few times along the way. So maybe we could talk about I feel like this concept of consent kind of comes up too. Is that person almost consenting to these other forces around them to give their soul away? Like, there's the deal with the devil and the devil takes your soul. Like, you have to go into an agreement, or does this kind of happen without the express intention?
Kind of tying into last week of where I was bringing up the dichotomy and duality of, self-sovereignty and forging your path through life, and then conversely of surrendering to a greater will. It's not a black and white answer per se, because oftentimes the devil is in the details. So someone can get your explicit consent to something in a nondescript or implicit manner, right? Again, looking back at terms and conditions, EULA agreements, that people will often just sign the bottom line and give something away, right? However, at a much more broader scope of things, everything isn't, we are not a victim of circumstance. We create our realities. I can very clearly see how where I am today is predicated upon all the previous actions and steps, and how if I had gone left at one turn, it might have turned out a lot differently. So Also, on the other hand, I would say taking full ownership and accountability for where one is also important. You know, recognizing like no one put a gun to my head and said, "Hey, drink this alcohol." It was a choice that I made, and again, I lost myself in the throes of addiction for many years because I chose to do that.
So you mentioned addiction a couple of times in this, as well as depression, apathy. I feel like all of those are somewhat related to each other. Is that maybe a symptom that happens kind of after or like during the process, and maybe why? Like, is the substance then used to almost like fill the void? Do you think?
That can be the intention, but it's not going to ever do the job right. You know, I often remind people of how they felt as children before they needed caffeine to be energetic, before they needed alcohol to have fun, before they needed X, Y, or Z. They outsource their sovereignty to a substance. Again, the word substance, and then ironically, is not give substance. And then kind of going back to again tying the spirit of things, the spirit of anger, the spirit of grief, alcohol and spirits. You know, these different things, different entities all coagulate and merge together in terms of the mind, body, spirit complex. Because again, we are what we consume. So yeah.
Right. So I guess in that case, and I mean, I'll be honest with myself and you and the audience, like I have done that to a certain extent with self-medication as the way I framed it for myself. It's like, oh, and it's primarily cannabis, marijuana, Santa Maria. It's like, oh, I'm self-medicating with this. It makes me feel better, but I also have the self-awareness and wherewithal to take the step back and be like, okay, it's probably something else deeper going on here that I'm trying to either distract or avoid. Kind of escapism is something that I tend to see with that as well. So I guess as part of the soul retrieval and recovery process, I imagine then removing dependencies or any exposure to that. Like, kind of how do you talk through the folks you work with if they may have a substance dependency as far as moving away from that?
The key thing is that when there's 24 hours in a day, and again, going back to the retention flows, energy flows, we are the summation of what we consume and what we also do and produce as a byproduct. Is that when people have something like addiction ripped out of them, or they have parts of themselves restored to themselves, it can feel a little weird at first, right? If you spent, your every past 5 p.m. getting off work of drinking alcohol and falling into a certain pattern of behavior, and now between 5 and 10 o'clock at night, there's a spaciousness there. Well, what are you going to utilize with that time and energy now? So that's at a very like base 3 dimensional like level of, again, patterns and habits. So like you have to restructure your life. This is also why integration and aftercare is part of any healing practice, whether that be allopathic, even though I don't like it that much, or shamanic, where, hey, like, so you had your experience, you have your healing now. Well, what is set in place to ensure that you don't go back to the previous thing you touched? But I just want to quickly note on something. Sometimes I don't even bring it to people's conscious attention if I remove something. This, I know we're talking about soul retrieval, but in terms of an exorcism, people will say like, well, what was attached to me, or like what was in me? They want to know, and I've learned to not tell them sometimes, because that, again, where attention goes, energy flows. So people can then remanifest, and again, like attracts like, and reattract that energy or spirit back to them. Whereas for me, I've also learned over the years, like, okay, like, don't purge in front of the patient, because it can just reattach itself back to them. Do it elsewhere, wait till they're gone, et cetera, et cetera. But I know we've shifted a little bit of gears right now back from soul retrieval. So can we segue over to how this takes form in terms of animals and then trauma? Because I think I'll connect a lot of dots between this 3 dimensional psychological understanding and the spiritual aspect.
Yeah, yeah, let's roll with that. So maybe you could just first level set with what is an animal totem as it relates to someone and their being and their soul.
Yeah, we touched on this last week. I'll go a little bit more in depth. So all of us have this totem pole, and referencing Native American cultures, you can imagine there's this unique array, multifaceted um, arrangement of different animal spirits that each person interacts with during the course of their life. And if we start at the bottom, of where they were when a child, what energy, what spirits they interact with. Maybe they had a family dog, maybe they had a hawk that followed them. And then later on in life, they interact with possums and raccoons. And then they had a traumatic experience with a horse, and a horse kicked them in the head. And we'll see again different lessons and energies, coinciding with these different animal spirits. And I referenced before, when I was a child, I had a lot of intimate experiences with black cats. And then there was an absence of black cats for around 20 years of my life. And it wasn't until, I was 32 that the black cat, came back into my life in a very profound way. And I was, again, coming back to the soul retrieval aspects, when we are unable to integrate and be whole and have every who is who in the zoo with us, then we are lacking in our power. And for me, El Gato de Negro, the black cat, whether that be from just the domesticated house cat to the jaguar, for me represents a lot of my shamanic abilities, and also my ability to remain undetected and unseen. And I can look at over the course of my life and see how that spirit and what it represents for me and how I interact and relate with it has kept me safe in certain situations. But when I am not in resonance or whole in harmony with that energy, how I'm weaker, right? Because again, the word powerful literally says it, full of power. And when people are not whole, they're lacking, and then they're weaker.
So can you talk about how maybe a person would identify their totem, and then maybe how you utilize those when you engage with someone on a soul retrieval?
As far as self-diagnosis goes, the best way I could tell people is I often ask people in everyday conversation, just as a always doing my work, but in a very passive way. It's like, what's your favorite animal? I love asking kids this question. What's your favorite animal? And what animal are you most afraid of? So we're going on two very far ends of the spectrum, because the one that they're consciously aware of that they resonate with is their cognitive self and what they are in most harmony with on a daily basis. Whereas what animal they're most afraid of, that's where the real medicine is. That's where the deepest part of their shadow and their trauma and fears are. And that's where the most healing is going to transpire, by integrating that darker, more taboo aspect of the self. And as far as for me, I just know when I'm in a trance state and I'm working on someone. Although I can, again, also use more logical detective methods, I prefer to just, again, do my work shamanically and go into a trance state, and everything just flows then.
Yeah, so for the soul retrieval process itself, that's when you're saying you kind of enter this trance state in order to find out where, when. Could you describe that a little bit, or is it kind of one of these things that's difficult to put into words?
So, for context, every person's experience of shamanism is unique. And I talked about this before, about how shamanism liberates people, and it's not seeking to yoke or bind people to different schools of magic, whether that's music theory, whether that's Christianity, whether that's yoga. These are all thought systems telling you how to perform magic. I'm not seeking to tell people that this is the way you do it. I'm just sharing with people how I do it. So I go into a trance state, whether that be through drumming, entheogens, rattling, or even just a deep level of meditation, and images will flow through my mind, and words and different frequencies, right? If it's more guttural and more, it might even sound demonic to people. It could be, relate. And I just intuitively know what animal that is. For example, the first soul retrieval I ever performed, the totem that she needed restored was polar bear. And it was less than a minute of after, smoking bufo, I immediately knew polar bear. And come to find out, when she was a kid, she was gifted a polar bear teddy bear and then lost it. And, it's been 20 years and here she's now hearing about polar bear again. So I can't always explain how I get my answers, but I just get my answers. All right. Pretty poor math student, but for
Yeah.
some people historically they call it a tunnel as far as like going into the underworld. Some shamans, go into different realities at whim, but for me it's very much a claircognizant experience.
And so the kind of link between the retrieval and the animal totem process is you kind of get a sense for these animals. Are you kind of looking for them specifically? Are there other like kind of beings or entities that come up in these types of practices?
Another good question relating back to my business, because a lot of times people will ask me about other data that was not pertinent to the healing. When someone says, "Hey, I like you do a soul retrieval for me," I'm not even. I've already the intention has been placed by them and I have agreed to it that that is what I'm going to do. So I'm not even looking out for ancestors or any malefic energies or demons. Like when someone says, "Hey, I want you to do a soul retrieval," I'm looking at restoring back what has lost. I'm not looking around someone's aura or karma or akashic records for any other sort of thing. Does that sufficiently answer that question, JT?
Yeah, yeah. I guess maybe then to like follow up. So once like, or maybe how do you leverage the maybe the power or the spirit behind the animal totem, and maybe how does the client or the person that you're working with kind of utilize and to their advantage incorporate that into their lives?
So I restore it through resonating with that energy and helping bringing it back to them. If I'm in person, a lot of times this will involve me blowing into someone's chest, but I've learned how to do this over the phone and other things as well digitally. But oftentimes, again, it comes back to me resonating with that creature, shapeshifting in my own way, acting as that medium, that conduit to allow them to then receive that which was lost. And as far as aftercare or someone working with a totem, I ask them, and I try not to project any of my own perceptions or beliefs surrounding these different spirits, because again, we all have our unique relationship with each spirit. No matter how many books there are on shamanism, like I love Animal Speak by Ted Andrews. I know you got that as well, but your relationship with Hawk could be drastically different than mine, or one person's perception on the knowledge and teachings of Al could be drastically different than mine. So I always do my best to employ the Socratic method of asking questions on how they feel and what that comes to their mind as far as that spirit, because that's their medicine.
Hmm.
I'm just the one, again, facilitating them getting back what was lost.
Makes sense. And maybe we could talk about the integration process. You mentioned it earlier, and like here again, I think for me, I was always kind of shaky as far as like what that really meant. It's like, okay, integrate it. Like you take this experience that you've had, and then you need to reconcile it with your life, and then moving forward, use it to help improve your situation and do so with intention so that you don't fall back into where you were before the magic happened, but was never really clear what that's supposed to look like. I know there's a bunch of different techniques. Could you maybe talk about with you and your work, what is integration and what are some ways of doing it?
Integration is taking what was gained during a healing session, whether that be someone sitting with entheogens like ayahuasca or bufo, a healing session with me, whether it be, an exorcism or soul retrieval or scan, taking what has been gained in terms of knowledge and self-awareness. Shameless self-plug, my tagline for my business is no self, sound health. The more you get and are self-aware, the more sound, whole your health will be, because again, you can't shoot what you can't see and you can't heal what you can't feel. So when people then are aware and cognizant of like, oh wow, like I had so much tension before the session in my shoulders and in my back, or I felt something release in my kidneys, now they have that awareness because they had that tension for who knows how long, right? But now, oh, I'm aware that that was there in the first place. Now that I know a new level of homeostasis and health is possible. That if I start to feel any blockages or heaviness there, or tension come back up, I know how to deal with it. So if it's the case of someone's shoulders rising and anxiety and the traps are also connected to the liver, I tell people like, well, watch your anger. In the case of the soul retrievals, if someone's primary totem that comes up is rooster, we need to look at how that relates to them. If they're a Muay Thai fighter, well, it's pretty obvious, plain as day, that they need to be fighting more. They need to be, channeling that aggressive masculine energy. Conversely, if it's a female and the rooster spears come up and they're single, well, maybe it's time to find, a mate. So again, how it relates to them differently, but it can act as a reminder for them. And again, as not to violate HIPAA here, but I know you have seen, and also I've already looked. I saw your son once, and I already knew what his primary totem was, and you have the 3-dimensional data to verify that I'm accurate, right? So,
Yeah, it's cool to see them appear in real life. That's something when I was working with you and going through the soul retrieval and animal totem process, and then reading through Ted Andrews' book as well. As like the coolest part is that you can see it in the world around you, and I guess it's easier if you have access to nature and places where animals are thriving, because it just gives them more more places for them to appear in. But like even around the house, we had ants come into the house for the first and only time when I needed to learn a lesson about teamwork and building together as like a group and discipline and just executing and things like that. So I thought that was a pretty cool aspect. You want to talk about maybe how others, or just how people can have that mindset of looking around in their environment for these different animals?
yes, yes. And also, I want to quickly state that again, there are no accidents and there are no coincidences. So if you just coincidentally continue to see Jaguar cars, which is a very rare and expensive car, that's not a coincidence that you're seeing that in your awareness. Again, the universe is always in every single moment expressing itself to you for you alone in a very unique way. So if you're continuing to see, that Ford Focus that your ex used to drive, well, you're not crazy. You're getting probably just tapped in and seeing the signs of what's going on at another dimension. But segueing from that back to the totems, you don't have to be, if someone's in a concrete jungle, they still have ways of them manifesting themselves, whether it be in people's conversations. It could just be something as simple as, if someone has gecko as their spirit and they keep seeing a lot of Geico commercials, it doesn't have to always be this eureka, like this majestic eagle swooped down from the sky and landed on my shoulder, and I was given the name he with sharp eyes. Like, no, like it doesn't have to. Shamanism is in every single mundane experience as well, which is also really critical, right? Again, we're not outsourcing God and divinity to a church or to a chapel or to a certain book or location in the globe. It's everywhere, and as long as that's why, and journaling really helps. Again, journaling is a common theme I bring up to people, is because it helps to reinforce that awareness. Because how many times does someone see something, but then until someone else draws their awareness to the pattern, then they actually see the pattern for what it is.
Right, and you can kind of be your own third person when you journal and give yourself that own self-awareness. When you were talking about the shoulder tension and then the totem pole, made me think of the chakras being in a line up and down the body. Is there correlation or association between animal totems and chakra energies?
Actually, in my experience, yes. And one of the services I offer is a chakra scan, where I go over the different chakras, what their state is, and then also what animal spirits are currently just, residing or doing their thing in different, chakras. Um, I have not read any material externally, but as far as my own personal experience, I have seen this heavily, of where people will have different animal spirits more predominant within their chakra system, which, who knows, maybe the Native Americans were just intuitively tapping into that, without having the chakra system, but seeing that someone might have bear energy more in their root chakra, and they might have, again, eagle more in their crown, or vice versa. Again, the possibilities are limitless. And I also want to state that I've seen, avian energies in the lower chakras, and then I've seen, more grounded creatures such as bears in the upper chakras. Because we think about this, like, well, one person might, be as quiet as a bear in the woods in terms of how they walk, but then if they have bear primarily in their throat chakra, well, how do they speak? Like, what's
Mm,
their roar like? So the possibilities are endless.
very cool. Are there a particular number of animal totems that a person would have, and then is there one that's like a maybe like primary one that stands out from the rest typically?
As far as how many one can have, I do not know. Although I would say again, what is within one's conscious awareness or most active changes depending on the season of life. But I would say this: every person has at least one or two that are strong for the entire course of their life, right? Again, I've already, it's been very clear to me in retrospect that for me, black cat was my primary, and that snake would be my secondary, and I have some other ones, but each person is different. But when you look through the course of your life on your own to reflect, there should be some patterns that you can see. And if you can't, then that's what I'm here for, to help people get that extra distance.
Excellent. Yeah. Anything else to add on this? I didn't know too many. I don't know too much more about the subject to ask any probing questions. Maybe you can help us. What am I missing here? Anything else we want to dig into?
If someone wishes to proctor their own soul retrieval, the stone best suited for this endeavor is called Galena, Galena. Just be mindful that if you're handling it with bare hands, it does have lead in it. So do not, stick your hands in your mouth. But it's very good for conducting soul retrievals. And then, just be open to not necessarily hearing what you want to hear. Sometimes I've, for lack of a better word, agitated people when I tell them, like, yeah, your primary spirit you need to work right now is a bird, because you're being very bird brained. And, no one ever said that the medicine is going to be pleasant. I know for me, when I integrated snake, it wasn't, there's so much fear in Western society around snakes and spiders that when someone then has that totem because of the societal bias towards it or against it, they might have some aversion towards themselves, which again comes back to being whole, having your
Mm,
whole.
yeah. No, that makes sense too. And like the kind of judgments you put on totems and the animals, especially as like you're saying, society has a lot of baggage around certain animals and what we perceive them as being good or bad or strong or weak. I think that's something that Ted Andrews brought up in his book too. Is like, don't dismiss a totem just because you may think it's insignificant. Like the ants one that I was referring to earlier is like, initially, if you had told me like, oh, you got this ant totem that you need to work with, it's like I'd be like, man, like little ants, like I step on those things and they're so puny. But then reading into it and thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, actually ants are very powerful, for especially for their size. They can lift like way more than seemingly the laws of physics would allow. Things like mice, like we're small creatures that we don't really give a lot of respect to typically day to day, but they are also like very industrious or intuitive and can kind of find their ways to survive in all these different situations. So yeah, I guess I would agree that don't dismiss your totem just because you may not think it's cool initially on first glance. Um, yeah, anything else is maybe around like the evolution of totems? And I know you said kind of like black cat, and then you could be like a house cat or like a full grown jaguar. Is that something that we should work as individuals with evolving our totems into their kind of most grand form, or is that something
Mhm.
that just kind of naturally happens on its own?
Then going back to the surrender versus the control, it's a combination. There's times where I am very intentional with certain spirits as far as fostering that relationship, again, as I've gotten awareness around them. But like subconsciously, before I even knew about shamanism, I tattooed several dog tattoos on me. Like, I have a wolf on my left shoulder. I have my Zoe, her paw print on me. People are subconsciously practicing this, whether they realize it or not. So you're going to go through your evolution, as needed regardless. So if you're not actively wanting to work with these different animal spirits, that's fine. Again, there's astrology, there's tarot, there's oracle, there's shamanism, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Excellent. Yeah, no, this is all pretty new to me. Learning it from and through you, so I appreciate you taking the time to educate me even further, and then sharing it with the audience. Anything else you want to leave the audience with as far as words of wisdom on this topic?
It's good to know who is who in the zoo.
Indeed it is. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you again, Nobu, for taking the time on the show. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.